Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today was the day, the official launch day, day one of spoiler season for Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So we have a ton of spoilers. I'm not going to drag this on with a long intro because we have a ton of cards to get through today. We're going to start with some of the less exciting stuff with common and uncommon, but still pretty cool and worth checking out. And then we're going to work our way towards the really crazy stuff as we get into this video. So let's dive right in. First up, we've got Hard Bristle Bandit. This is 1 green and 1 for a 1/1 plant rogue that can tap for a mana of any color. Whenever you commit a crime, you get to untap it, but this ability triggers only once each turn. So if you can target your opponent's stuff on your turn, you can tap this for an additional mana. And then if you can target your opponent's stuff on their turn, you can also untap it on their turn and tap it for an additional mana on their turn, which is really cool. But what's really worth noting about this is the fact that it's a plant. It's plant tribal. So Insidious Roots is a thing, and that deck's kind of crazy, right? Are we going to see even more plants? Can this slot into an Insidious Roots deck? Because every time Insidious Roots goes off, it adds a +1/+1 counter to every plant on the board. Can we make that happen? Can this work in that? We'll find out, because I have a feeling more plants are on the way, and we're gonna try, I think, because that just seems too cool to not do. Next up, we've got CAC Tarantula. CAC Tarantula, a 6/5 plant spider for 2 green and 4, but if you control a desert, it costs 1 less, so it's 2 green and 3. It also has reach, and whenever it becomes the target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, you can draw a card. As a common, this is actually pretty good. This will absolutely see play in your limited decks. Being able to draw a card when they use their removal on it is pretty good, and I feel like the deserts are looking like they're pretty common in this set, so the chances that you get 2, 3, maybe 4 in your limited deck, and you probably have one by turn 5 so that you can play this for 5, are pretty high. I think that's going to happen more often than not, so I think this is actually a pretty cool card for limited, pretty decent. It's not going to be a high pick, but you know, your 22nd, your 23rd card, I think it's a pretty decent inclusion if you've got, you know, 3 or 4 deserts. Next up, we've got Quill Charger, 1 red and 3 for a 4/3 porcupine mount. That's right, a porcupine mount. Whenever it attacks while saddled, it gets +1/+2 and menace until end of turn, and it saddles for 2. Now, saddling works by tapping any number of other creatures with total power equaling the saddle number, in this case 2. So you can tap 2 1-power creatures or 1 2-power creature or whatever you want. What's important to note is you can only saddle as a sorcery, so it's only worth doing when you're attacking, right? You can only do it when you're attacking. But also, saddle is, I guess, kind of similar to Enlist, but the one thing that it has going for it that's a little bit better than Enlist is the same thing that Crew also has going for it, which is you can play this guy on turn 4, right? And then whatever creature you play on turn 5, even though that creature has summoning sickness, you can use that creature to saddle the Charger still and swing as a 5/5 menace. So it's really cool that you can use your creatures that can't swing yet to saddle your creatures that can, and I think you can get a lot of value out of it that way. And in that way, these saddle creatures are a little bit better than I think they look on the surface. So this will be a quality inclusion for limited, but again, nothing crazy, right? This is another one of those like 22nd, 23rd picks in draft. Next up, we've got Armored Armadillo. 1 white mana for a 0/4 Armadillo. It has Ward 1, and you can pay 4 mana to give it +X/+0, where X is its toughness. Another really cool card for limited, probably one of the better commons we'll see today. Being able to come down and just stop everything with 3 power or less until you can stabilize, with Ward 1 on top of it, is a pretty cool little defensive card. But the fact that like later in the game, when you have mana and maybe you're running out of gas and you just need a mana sink to put it into, this actually turns into a very relevant threat that can not only block and kill things, but also it doesn't have defender, so it can attack in and you can activate the ability, make it a 4/4. If you have 8 mana, you can make it an 8/4. You know, if you have a way to buff its toughness, you can buff its power even more with this activated ability by just having more toughness to begin with. So really cool little common here. I wouldn't be surprised if this sees more play than you'd expect. Next up, we've got Trained Aarinx. This is probably my favorite common of the day. A 3/1 for 2 mana. It's a cat beast mount. And whenever it attacks while saddled, it gains first strike until end of turn, and you scry 1. And then it has saddle 2. So what makes this card so good, again, is the fact that you can play a creature on turn 3 after this came down on turn 2 and use that turn 3 creature to saddle this guy and immediately swing in with a 3/1 first strike. And then you get this extra value of scrying 1. And if you're swinging every single turn with this 3/1 first strike, you're basically scrying every turn, right? So in a way, it's almost like every turn you're getting the best of the top 2 cards on your deck, because you get to scry whatever it is away if it's not great every combat. So as a common, I kind of love this. It works really well in an aggressive deck, I think, and out of all the commons we've seen today, I think it's probably the highest pick for limited. I'm sure there'll be many, many better ones coming further on in spoiler season, but for now, I feel that way. Next up, we've got our first uncommon. This is Rattleback Apothecary, 1 black and 2 for a 3/2 Gorgon Warlock with Death Touch. Whenever you commit a crime, target creature you control gains your choice of menace or lifelink until end of turn. You commit a crime whenever you target the opponent, something they control, or cards in their graveyard. So this is a little bit slow. 3 power creature for 3 mana, right? And you have to have things that target in order to get this extra value of menace or lifelink. But honestly, the Death Touch makes it pretty good. So just having a 3 power Death Toucher means you can actually have somewhat of a clock on the board that they do have to block at some point, and whatever they block it with is gonna die. Or if you need to turtle up, you can just use it as a defender, right? You can block their biggest thing and trade up with it, which is really nice. So having just, at the floor, those stats, and then also this extra ability of sometimes being able to hand out menace or lifelink, kind of makes this guy pretty good in limited. Lifelink is way better in limited than most people realize. It's especially good in limited, more so than in constructed. So really pay attention to lifelink in limited, because a lot of times it just comes down to trying to out-tempo and trying to win the race. And if you're lifelinking and you're padding out your life total while you're, reducing them to 0, sometimes that's enough to just get you there before they can kill you. So lifelink's important, and this guy will be pretty decent in limited. Next up, we've got Unfortunate Accident. This looks like it's not that great of a card on the surface, but it's actually better than it looks. So 1 black mana for an instant. It has this new ability called Spree, where you have to choose at least 1 or more additional costs. And the 2 costs here are 2 and a black, destroy target creature, or just 1 colorless mana and you create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token that can tap at sorcery speed to give any creature +1/+0 until end of turn. So the fact that this can be a 2 mana mercenary or a 4 mana removal spell, both at instant speed, is honestly pretty good as far as removal goes in limited. But what's important to note about this is it has the same upsides as Charms, where depending on what you need for the situation, you can pick one mode or the other, except unlike Charms, if you have extra mana to sink into this thing, you can get both modes. So if you pay a total of 5 mana, you're killing their best creature and making some board presence at instant speed, which you can do as a combat trick. So I think because of that, this is actually a lot better than it looks. On the surface, your gut instinct is like, oh, 4 mana removal, it's okay. I might put it in if I'm desperate for removal. But really, when you look at the versatility combined with like just how much value you can get if you have all of the mana to pump into this a little later in the game, both of those put together kind of make this card better than you might think. It's still not like amazing, but it's definitely better than you think and absolutely worth considering for limited for sure. Next up, we have Slick Shot Lockpicker, a 2/3 human rogue for 3 mana. Enters the battlefield, target instant or sorcery in your graveyard, gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. So this guy's going to let you recast your best instant or sorcery. The problem with that is if you already spent 3 mana on the Lockpicker, you might not have enough mana left over to play your best instant or sorcery, so you might have to pick like a lesser spell. This card solves that problem by having plot of 1 blue and 2. And what that lets you do is you pay the plot cost, you exile the card, and then on any later turn, it can't be the same turn, you're allowed to play that card from exile for free, for no mana. So it's like you're sacrificing tempo right now to get more value later on. So you plot this thing away, say go, and then on a later turn, maybe the next turn, maybe four turns from now when you really need it, you just play this guy for free. Just 0 mana, comes down as a 2/3, gives your best spell flashback, and then you have all of your mana untapped in order to cast that thing. So this guy's really good. It's going to give you a lot of card advantage, specifically in Limited, but it might be a little too expensive and a little too slow for Constructed. I'm really not sure. It's going to take a little bit of testing for sure. Next up, we've got Chrom, Violent Cacophony. This is a 4 mana, 2/3 flying legendary zombie horror in the colors of Izzet. And whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on Chrom and draw a card. Now, this guy is nowhere near good enough for Constructed, for sure. He's too slow. But in Limited, actually really good. Like a flying body that can draw you cards as you double spell and get bigger with +1/+1 counters every single time it happens is actually pretty good when evasion is super important in Limited, right? So eventually this guy grows into a huge game-ending threat. And what's cool is he's drawing you cards along the way, so by drawing those cards, he's sort of helping to enable making sure you have enough gas in your hand to be able to double spell so that you can keep doing it. And that really kind of helps him like go overboard in Limited, I think. So could be a draw engine, could turn into a big game-ending threat. I think it's absolutely worth a slot in Limited for sure. I wouldn't say like a high pick, but also not your 22nd or 23rd card. Like if you're in this archetype, I think you want to pick him not high, but decently high enough, right? You don't want to wait until last minute. Like he's worth a slot for sure. Next up, we've got Marauding Sphinx. 2 blue and 3 for a 3/5 Sphinx Rogue with Flying, Vigilance, and Ward 2. Also, whenever you commit a crime, you Surveil 2, but it only triggers once a turn. We covered this guy back when we saw some leaks a couple weeks ago. I think it's pretty good in Limited. The fact that this can swing in the air with 3 power, but then still be a 5 toughness blocker in the air because of the Vigilance, and it's really hard to get rid of them because of the Ward 2. Like, all of that just makes this a really good card in Limited that's going to come down, stabilize you immediately, and just give you a way to win the game while also stabilizing the board, which is key. Not only that, if you can manage to commit crimes, you get to Surveil 2, you get to dig for the perfect answer, or in Limited, dig for your bomb, which is super important because every deck's going to have a few bombs, right? And if you can get to yours before your opponent, you're probably going to win. So being able to Surveil 2 every time you commit a crime and just get closer to your bomb, it's going to be really important in Limited. And so I think this guy is actually another pretty decent middle-of-the-road pick. Not super high, maybe higher than Crawl. He's pretty good. Next up, we've got Bine Intervention. This is 2 mana, 1 white and 1 for an instant. Destroy any artifact or creature, but its controller creates a 2/2 white ox creature token. Not the best removal ever. I don't like the idea of giving our opponent a 2/2. In certain Constructed decks, it could be worth it. Maybe you're playing with a lot of sweepers and you know a turn or two from now you're just going to sweep up the Ox anyway, and destroying their huge threat is going to buy you the time you need to get there. So maybe Constructed. I don't think so because there's just better removal, but possibly. Instant speed, 2 mana. It's at least worth considering. I don't think it ultimately makes the cut. But in Limited, I think it's got a better chance, although the 2/2 body matters a lot more in Limited, so I'm really not sure there too. The one silver lining with this card is the fact that it can be removal if you need it to be, but it can also be a way to generate value yourself. If you have an artifact token or something on the battlefield that you don't need, you can just blow it up and turn it into a 2/2, right? Or you can like block their huge attacker with a 1/1 and effectively fog it, and then before combat damage, destroy your own 1/1 and replace it with a 2/2. So it's like you kind of fogged their biggest creature, saved yourself a bunch of life, and replaced your 1/1 with a 2/2. And so like in the right deck where you can get that kind of value, but then also use it as removal if you're desperate, it might actually be worth a lot more. So keep that in mind when drafting. I think in decks like that, this goes way up in value. Next up, we've got Jolene, Plundering Pugilist. 1 green, 1 red, and 1 for a 4/2 legendary human mercenary. Whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures with power 4 or greater, you create a treasure token. Pay 1 red and 1 and sack a treasure, and she deals 1 damage to any target. Now, this is not going to be good enough for Constructed, I don't think, but in Limited, this is actually a powerhouse, right? Being able to just create treasure tokens every time that your power 4 or greater creatures swing is going to ramp you a ton, and then being able to use those treasure tokens as more than just ramp, but also as fuel to just ping and remove certain creatures, or just finish off the opponent by pinging the last few points of damage to the head. There's just a lot of versatility here. Any kind of reusable removal is always going to be really good. So I think in Limited, this is actually a really high pick if you know for sure you're going to be in the color combination. So keep it in mind. Definitely keep it in mind. Plan the Heist. 2 blue and 2 for a sorcery. Surveil 3 if you have no cards in hand, and then draw 3 cards. And it also plots for 1 blue and 3. Now, on first inspection, it doesn't look that good, right? 4 mana, draw 3. We've seen this before. It's fine. And when you think about the fact that you get to Surveil 3 if you plot it first, right? So you pay the plot cost, put it into exile. You wait until you're out of gas, and then you finally play it from exile for free. And then you get to Surveil 3 before you draw the cards because you had no cards in hand, right? Like that's the whole point. But I think the thing that's easy to overlook about plotting it is the fact that if you plot this card off to the side and wait for a later turn, not only are you getting the Surveil 3 because you waited until you were out of gas, but you're able to Surveil 3 and draw 3 on a turn where you still have all of your mana available. So it's super important that you're digging 6 cards, keeping 3 of them, right? Getting the card you really need into your hand, and then all of your mana is there so you can cast it immediately. You don't have to wait. So in that way, it almost feels a little bit like instant speed draw, and it feels like it's not quite as expensive as a 4 mana thing, because if you line it up correctly, you can actually get way more value out of this, even though it's still costing 4 mana to plot. So you gotta be very, very careful with how you play some of these plot cards, but personally, I think plot's gonna be super busted. I think just the potential to set up a whole bunch of cards in exile and be able to play way more cards in 1 turn than you should normally be able to play in 1 turn with the mana you have, the ability to trigger prowess with stuff like that, play like 7 creatures in the same turn and trigger War Leader's Call, like all that stuff is kinda crazy. Not to mention the fact that you can just push through counter spells, right? Like, how much mana can your opponent possibly hold up to counter your spells? Like, what's the most amount of spells they can counter in 1 turn? 2? Maybe 3? If you plot like 5 cards and then you play them all on the same turn for 0 cost, like, they're not going to be able to counter everything. So even just pushing through your opponent's counter spells, I think makes plot really, really good. And they can't counter you plotting the card to begin with, right? Because it's not casting it, it's just exiling it. So yeah, I don't know. I really think this plot mechanic, there's a lot of subtle ways that it's crazy broken, and people aren't going to really realize the full extent of it until they start coming up against it on Arena, or they start playing it in person, and just see the busted things that you can do with plot. But let's move on. I digress. Next up, we have Lazav, Familiar Stranger. This is a 3-drop 1/4 legendary shapeshifter in the colors of Dimir. Whenever you commit a crime, you put a +1/+1 counter on him, and then you may exile a card from a graveyard. If a creature is exiled this way, Lazav becomes a copy of that card until end of turn, but this ability only triggers once each turn. So not only is he getting bigger and bigger and bigger every time you commit a crime, but you're also turning him into the best creature, essentially, in a graveyard by exiling that card. So getting to swing with, you know, the best creature in a graveyard is pretty awesome to begin with, but when you take into account the fact that he's getting +1/+1 counters, so every time he changes into a creature, it's going to be a bigger, badder, nastier version of that creature, because those +1/+1 counters keep piling up, and they stick around no matter what creature you're turning into. So this can actually become a hugely formidable threat really early just by constantly targeting your opponent's stuff. And what's cool is you can kind of like set up a snowball effect where like you use your removal to kill their creature, which counts as committing a crime. So then you remove a creature from the graveyard, maybe the one that you just killed, or maybe the one you killed last time, right? And then it becomes a copy, and then you kind of keep doing it. You keep killing a creature to commit a crime, which then also puts more creatures in the graveyard, so you have more things to exile later, and it just keeps snowballing. So I think Lazav with a lot of removal is going to be super, super good. Next up, we've got Intimidation Campaign. This is a lot like Disinformation Campaign. On the surface, it looks not as powerful, but it might be more powerful, and I'll explain why in just a minute. Coffee break. Coffee break. Coffee. Nectar of the gods. Coffee is very important. Nectar of the gods. Where was I? 1 black, 1 blue, and 1 for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life, and you draw a card. So basically every time you play this card, you're going to drain for 1 and draw another card. And then whenever you commit a crime, you may return Intimidation Campaign to its owner's hand. So the idea here is you're playing it, you're draining, you're drawing, and then you target the opponent or their creature. Maybe you kill their creature with removal. Bounce it to your hand, replay it, drain again, draw. You keep repeating the process. Now, this is going to take a lot of mana, but what's important to note is committing a crime is a lot easier to do than Surveil, which is what you had to do with Disinformation Campaign. So even though this isn't doing as much, because I believe Disinformation Campaign made the opponent discard a card when you played it as well, so even though this isn't quite as much value as Disinformation Campaign, it's way easier to trigger. And it's way easier to trigger with cards that you just want to be playing anyway, instead of having to jump through hoops and play cards that have to surveil in order to make it good. So being able to just play all your normal removal, and every time you remove something, you get to return the campaign to your hand and get that trigger for free, can be super valuable, right? It lets you play all the best cards in the deck that you would normally just want to play anyway, and this is just like silver lining value on top of it. So there is a chance, if the standard format gets to a place where there can be some grind out the game style decks that drag the game on and just try to grind out value for a win, if that kind of deck has a place in the new standard, you might see something like this pop up in a constructed deck, in a control deck, where they can actually take the time to get so much value off of this that they just steamroll over the opponent, right? It's a lot of value as long as you have the time and the mana to take advantage of it. Next up, we've got Forma Posi. I kind of love this card. 1 white, 1 red, and X for a sorcery. You create X 1/1 red mercenary creature tokens that can tap at sorcery speed to give a creature +1/+0. Until end of turn, of course. So yeah, you just make X 1/1s. This is super good for any kind of go wide strategies. Boros Convoke might even consider running this. It might be too expensive for that deck. They usually want to end the game before they have like a big expensive spell, but it's possible something like this could make the cut, or maybe in some kind of a new aristocrat style deck. There's another card we'll take a look at in just a minute that this might fit well with if we go Mardu, and really provide some value for that kind of a deck. So super cool here. I think the fact that they can tap to give creatures +1/+0 is something that should not be overlooked, because that's a key part of the creature. So it's not just 1/1 tokens you're getting, but it's also this ability to kind of take all your 1/1 tokens, have them dump all their power onto one creature, and have to contend with that one creature before moving on, and then doing it to a different creature the next combat, right? So you can get a lot of value that way, and having the ability to do that while also having a bunch of 1/1s that you can use for other stuff like chump blocking or just swarming the opponent or sacrifice effects or whatever you need, does make this card pretty good, I think. Next up, we've got Rackish Crew, and this is the card that I think that last card would combo well with. 1 black and 2 for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token. With tap, target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn at instant speed, or sorry, at sorcery speed. Also, whenever an outlaw you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. So this is a lot like Bastion of Remembrance. In fact, it's exactly like Bastion of Remembrance, except for 2 very important but subtle details. One of them is a way in which it's better, the other is a way in which it's worse. So it's better in that the creature that it gives you when it enters the battlefield has this extra ability that can tap to give something +1/+0, right? That makes it strictly better than Bastion of Remembrance. But the thing that makes it strictly worse is the fact that it only triggers when outlaws you control die, and not any creature. Outlaws are assassins, mercenaries, pirates, rogues, and warlocks. Now, you can mitigate this downside as long as you build your deck very carefully and you only have those creature types. You can actually take advantage of this and kind of mitigate that downside and get rid of it completely, or almost completely, right? In which case, the upside of getting this ability on your 1/1 to tap and give something +1/+0 is just gravy. It's just extra. So if you can build the right deck, I actually think this has a shot at being a contender in Constructed, in Standard. I'm super excited about trying to brew some kind of crazy outlaw, aristocrats, outlaw sacrifice style deck. And I think this card will be a key part of a deck like that, if a deck like that is good enough to exist. So I kind of love this card, and it's going to be great in Limited too, because this inevitability of your board just eventually draining out your opponent if they kill everything is a lot of times really, really hard to contend with in a format like Limited. Next up, we've got Vial Smasher, Gleeful Grenadier, whatever. A 3/2 legendary Goblin Mercenary for 2 mana and Rakdos. Whenever another outlaw enters the battlefield under your control, Vial Smasher, Gleeful Grenadier deals 1 damage to target opponent. So now we're starting to see all of these outlaw synergies kind of pile up on top of each other. If you take the last 2 cards we looked at, and now you add Vial Smasher into the mix, it kind of starts getting crazy, right? A 3/2 creature for 2 is already pretty good. And what's rad is you can just play this guy in a Rakdos deck that's being super aggressive anyway as just a good body. And then every outlaw that comes down is just dealing extra damage, just extra silver lining damage that's just going to help you close out the game maybe a whole turn sooner. So in that way, I think it's possible he could see playing Constructed. He's definitely going to be great in Outlaw Tribal, in Limited. Very high pick if you know that you're in that archetype. But he works great with the last 2 cards, right? If we can just pile all of these outlaw synergies on top of each other and have them cross-pollinate and really work together, I see like a really ridiculous Limited deck brewing, and maybe even possibly a Constructed deck that's worthy with all of these cards. So some pretty crazy stuff to look forward to brewing for sure when the set comes out. Next up, we've got Frontier Seeker, another really good uncommon. This is a 2/1 human scout for 1 white and 1. When it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a mount creature card or a plains card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So if you're somewhat decently deep into like Mount Tribal, Saddle Tribal, being able to look at the top 5 cards and find one and put it in your hand is super good on a 2 power creature for 2 mana that's an okay body that can trade with things as well, right? But the fact that even if you miss, you still can hit a plains and put a plains into your hand makes it even better. That versatility and that value tacked onto, like I said, a somewhat relevant body that can actually trade with something on the field seems really good to me. It's also human, which human tribal's a thing that matters. This pairs actually really well with one of the rare mounts that we're going to see in a little bit. And I think the intention is that they kind of go together like peanut butter and jelly. And I'm sort of excited to see where a deck with both of them will go. But we're going to have to talk about that when we get to that card. But this card, super solid as it is. Next up, we've got Ruthless Lawbringer. 1 black, 1 white, and 1 for a 3/2 Vampire Assassin. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature, and when you do, destroy target non-land permanent. I absolutely love this guy. I might actually love him too much. Those of you who've been watching the channel for a while know that one of my best standard decks right now, one of my most underappreciated standard decks right now, is my Mardu Vampires deck, and I am still convinced that it's the best aggro deck in the format, Boros be damned. And this slots into that perfectly, right? This can go into Vampire Tribal, this can go into Assassin Tribal, and it's just really good as a way to have a body that can also give you removal. Like, you can destroy any non-land permanent with this. It doesn't have to just be a creature. So the versatility here of being able to take out the most important thing on your opponent's side of the board and sacrifice your least important thing on your side of the board is super huge. And the fact that this is just an uncommon means it's going to be a very high pick in limited. Like, you absolutely want it. It just deals with anything and gives you a body to boot. So I think this card is great. I'm going to absolutely run it in limited. It's going to be a high pick, but I really, really look forward to trying to brew this in constructed. I think there's a place for it in my Daywalker Mardu Vampires deck for sure. And I think it might make the cut in an Assassin brew as well. I've got an Assassin deck on the channel that I've been messing around with here or there. I actually have a new version of that I'm going to be putting up soon as well. And I think this might be an even newer version that we can, like, put a card like this into the mix and really make it sing. Next up, we've got Miriam Herd Whisperer, a 3/2 legendary human druid for 2 mana in the colors of Selesnya. As long as it's your turn, mounts and vehicles you control have hexproof. Also, whenever a mount or vehicle you control attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So obviously in Mount Tribal, this is going to be nuts. In Vehicle Tribal, it's also going to be nuts. And I wonder if there's a deck that can utilize both vehicles and hexproof, or and mounts rather, to get the hexproof for both. It's interesting, right? But the fact that it also piles up counters on your mounts and vehicles is just really great. Really great extra value, right? The hexproof, the counters, all on a 3/2 body for 2. Like, it just kind of feels like it does a lot. It does a lot for 2 mana, especially as an uncommon. I think this is a slam dunk in limited. I think this is probably first pickable. Maybe not first pickable, but very high. Maybe second, third, fourth pick. If you know you're in the colors, and there's even a chance you're going to be running some mounts, you probably slam this, and then you start to move in that direction a bit more. So, just a great card. Next up, we've got Scorching Shot. Speaking of great cards, 2 red mana for a sorcery that deals 5 damage to target creature. That's it. Sheoldred, get out of here. We hate you. This finally gives mono red a way to deal with Sheoldred at only 2 mana, which is crazy. I absolutely think this card's going to be used in standard, in mono red. I don't know if it makes the cut in 2-color decks like Boros or whatever, because the double red mana is pretty hefty for something that you want to have the option to play on turn 2 as much as possible. But you're probably not playing it on turn 2, right? You're probably saving this, killing Sheoldred, and then having mana left over to put even more board presence on the board and just win the game. That's why it's going to be so good, right? But it's also going to be amazing in limited. You have to be very, very careful with your colors, though. Chances are you're going to have to wait a little bit longer to play this in limited because you're probably not playing a monocolor deck. So you got to be a little bit careful about how you build out your mana base, but absolutely a great card. 2 mana for 5 damage. I think that's the best rate we've ever seen in red, to be honest. Granted, you can only hit a creature, right? And it has to be at sorcery speed, but I think it's worth it for being able to hit for 5 damage, especially considering how prominent Sheoldred is in the environment. Next up, we've got... What's next? What's next? Oh, Honest Rutstein. Honestly, freaking amazing. Nectar of the Gods. I'll drink to that. 1 green, 1 black, and 1 for a 3/2 legendary human warlock. When he enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. This guy is nuts, right? Remember Gravedigger? 4 mana for a 2/2 that brought a creature from your graveyard to your hand? This is 3 mana for a 3/2 that does the same thing. Not only that, but all of your creatures get a cost reduction of 1. I think this guy is just insane. This is super good at uncommon. This is a very, very high pick in limited. Maybe not first pick, but pretty close to it. It's just nuts. What I really like about this card in particular is the fact that you can kind of create a loop with them, right? You have one Rutstein in play, you force your opponent to deal with it, and then if they do and it goes to the graveyard, you play a second one from your hand and use it to bring back the first one. And now the first one is sitting in your hand again, and you wait for them to deal with the new Rutstein. And then when it dies, you do the same thing. They just keep bringing back each other. You've always got a Rutstein, which means you're always jamming out creature spells at a discount. Just seems like it could be crazy. Absolutely a high pick in limited. For sure. I want to try and brew around this guy in Constructed. I think he's really cool. Next up, we've got Make Your Own Luck. This might be the best uncommon of the day. 5 mana in Simic for a sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may exile a non-land card from among them. If you do, it becomes plotted. Put the rest into your hand. Wait. Put the rest into your hand. So not only do you get to grab the best card from the top 3 and then set it up so that you get to cast it for free next turn. 𝒂𝒂𝒄𝒆, I'm looking at you. But you also draw the other 2 cards? Like, that's crazy. For an uncommon? What is this? It's nuts. And sometimes you might hit another Make Your Own Luck, right? So you like exile the Make Your Own Luck and play that for free the next turn after drawing the other 2 cards, and then you do it again. Like, I don't know. Is it just me, or is this card bananas? Let me know in the comments below, because I just think it's crazy. I can't believe this is just an uncommon, and I'm absolutely going to be brewing around it as soon as this set launches, because this just seems nuts to me. It just seems, I don't know, just seems bananas. Next up, we've got Confirmation. These are the first rares we're going to show. Confirmation of all of the fast lands that we're missing coming to Standard. Thank goodness. So all of the enemy color fast lands that we didn't currently have in Standard, they're all coming to Standard. So we've got Spire Bluff Canal for Izzet, Inspiring Vantage for Boros Convoke players. I know you're excited about this one. Concealed Courtyard for Orzhov, Botanical Sanctum for Simic, and Blooming Marsh for Golgari. That's good. We needed those. That's going to enable a lot of 2-color aggro decks that weren't as viable before, and even the ones that are viable, it's going to make them even better. So really important that we got these, and we kind of have an embarrassment as far as an embarrassing amount of options for dual lands in Standard right now, since it didn't rotate and rotation changed to 3 years instead of 2. There's just so many ridiculous dual lands in the format. It's kind of gross, but it is what it is. Every option's open to us now, right? Everything. Next up, we've got Hell to Pay. 1 red and X for a sorcery, deals X damage to anything, and then it makes a bunch of treasure tokens equal to the amount of excess damage dealt to a creature this way. This is decent. It's not going to be that great, right? It's good as removal. You get to kill whatever you need to kill, and if you have extra mana sitting around, the extra mana that you pump into it, you'll get to turn into treasure tokens, which is nice, right? This could set up situations where you can get like an Atali out early or something like that. But I think there's just better removal, and I think there's just better treasure generation. So as much as I do like this card, I don't think it's going to make any kind of significant impacts, but I still welcome it. Next up, we've got Free Strider Lookout. 1 green and 2 for a 3/3 human rogue with reach. Whenever you commit a crime, you look at the top 5, and you may put a land from among them onto the battlefield tapped. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, but this ability triggers only once each turn. This guy is nuts. He doesn't look that good on the surface, but you're going to be targeting your opponent's stuff all the time anyway, probably, with removal, right? So when you take into account the fact that it takes no mana to trigger this ability at all, and it's going to trigger off of you doing things that you're going to want to be doing anyway, you just get free lands. And the fact that it only triggers once a turn, you got to take into account that it only triggers once on your turn, but if you're able to commit another crime on your opponent's turn, it can trigger again on your opponent's turn. So if this guy's in play, you kill your opponent's creature, you ramp a land from the top, into play for free. And then you say go, and then on your opponent's turn you kill another creature, and then you do it again. And then by the time it's your turn again and you're untapping, now you've ramped 2 extra lands, right? And then you play a land from your hand, and now you're just like going nuts with mana. So I do think this guy's a little bit better than he looks. He's fragile, he's a 3/3, he dies to a lot of stuff, doesn't die to cut down, but he does have reach, which is nice. And he's 2 relevant creature types, especially with Rogue being a part of the Outlaw tribal batching. I think this guy's a little bit better than he looks. That being said, if he just dies to removal right away, that's a shame, but you know, dems to breaks. Next up, we've got Tiny Bones Joins Up, a legendary enchantment for 1 black mana. When it enters the battlefield, any number of target players each discard a card, and also whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, any number of target players each mill a card and lose a life. I kind of love this card. There's a lot of different ways you can use it. I mean, you can just jam it to make them discard a card, and then use it as sacrifice fodder for something like Braids, which is cool. But you can also play it in like a legendary tribal deck, where every single time you have a legendary creature enter the battlefield, you get to ping them for 1. And that 1 damage probably adds up if you're deep enough into a legendary tribal deck, right? Especially maybe you're playing like Rattleback, and you can just really go to town. So I kind of love this at just 1 mana. It is legendary, so you can only have 1 on the field at a time, but like because it gets value when you play it, it's almost kind of okay to just play it and then sack it to something and then play your second one, or even just play your second one and let the first one die to the legend rule. It's not always that bad of a thing, so I feel like I feel like there's something here. I feel like there's a deck here for sure, and I want to try to brew it. Next up, we've got Vraska Joins Up, 1 green and 1 black for a legendary enchantment. When Vraska Joins Up enters the battlefield, you put a death touch counter on each creature you control, and whenever a legendary creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So there's kind of 2 different ways to use this. Now, if you're in legendary tribal and playing a bunch of legendary creatures, you're going to increase the chances of drawing even more cards by having more creatures that can hit in, right? But you also want to take advantage of the death touch counters, and the wider you go, the quicker you go that wide, the more value you're going to get off those death touch counters. If you can just go wide with a whole bunch of tokens and then jam this and give them all death touch counters, like that's crazy. Like now they can't block all your 1/1s, or they just have to trade their big creatures for your crappy tokens. So you can use it either way. And if there's a deck that's somehow able to kind of like take both of these ideologies and jam them into the same deck, I think we might have something really special. I don't know what it's going to take to make that deck exist, but even if we just mostly go wide with tokens and then we have a few legendaries in the deck so that we can draw a card here or there, that might be good enough as well. But it's a pretty cool card. I'm excited to see where it goes and how it gets used. Next up, we have Transmutation Font, 5 mana for an artifact. You can tap it to make a blood token, a clue token, or a food token. You can also pay 3 mana, tap it, and sacrifice 3 artifact tokens with different names. Search your library for an artifact card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. Activate only as a sorcery. So the idea of being able to cheat giant artifacts from your library directly onto play by sacrificing insignificant tokens, and being able to do it on an artifact that you can reuse, and you can do that over and over and over again. You can fetch a different big artifact every single turn. Like, that idea is awesome, right? And it's super tempting. But in reality, I think this card costs a little too much and is a little too slow. Like, you have to pay 5 mana just to get it onto the field, and the only thing it's doing that turn, unless you somehow have 8 mana, is making like a blood token or something. Right? That's kind of bad. Like, I don't think you can take your turn off to play this and just get 1 token. That feels rough. And if you've already got the 8 mana, like, you probably just play your 𝑉𝒂𝒄𝐿 or Atraxa or Portal to Phyrexia or whatever from your hand if you've already got a ton of mana. So it's not like the chance... I don't know. It's not like the chances are high that you're going to be able to play this and activate it to search something out the same turn. Right? So I just feel like all in all, it's very costly, it's a little slow. I think if the cost of the artifact and the ability were swapped, and it costs 3 to play out and 5 to activate, it would be a little bit better. Like, it would be expensive to activate, but you'd always be getting something that's even more expensive, so it would kind of be worth it. And it would allow you to get the thing out earlier, like on turn 3, so you can start to create tokens every turn and build up some value, which makes the card, you know, a little more usable, even without being able to search things up. But unfortunately, 5 mana is a lot. I don't know if this makes the cut. Maybe there's some kind of crazy deck out there that's able to utilize it, but we'll have to wait and see. Next up, we have Double Down. Whenever you cast an outlaw spell, copy that spell. Very simple. We've seen cards like this before. There was one in Innistrad for zombies. The main problem with a card like this is it comes down for 4 mana and kind of takes up your whole turn to play, right? You want to play it early so that you don't miss out on playing outlaws and getting copies of them, right? But if you play it early as you can, like turn 4, you're skipping your entire turn 4 and not playing anything that affects the board state at all. So like by the time turn 5 rolls around, you're probably so behind on tempo, I don't know if you can catch up with double spells. The one silver lining with this card is the fact that it exists in a set with the plot mechanic. So theoretically, you could do something like spend your first 3 turns plotting a bunch of outlaws into exile, and then you can jam this, and then maybe follow it up with a sweeper on turn 5 to clear out the board and to make up for all of the turns you spent not getting any board presence. And then finally, you get to just play all of your outlaws for free from exile because of plot, and just all of them trigger the double down. So maybe if there's some way to make that reasonable and realistic, there could be something there. Plot letting you just put everything aside to wait until after double downs, you know, on the battlefield, and then get to play them all for free and get all the value. Seems like potentially viable. That's probably the best way we can use it, but it's still going to be kind of slow. It really depends on what else we see in this set that might enable such a strategy. Next up, we have the Key to the Vault. 1 blue and 1 for a legendary artifact equipment. And this one's a little expensive too, in my opinion. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you look at that many cards from the top of your library, and you may exile a non-land card from among them and put the rest on the bottom in a random order, and you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So it equips for 3 mana, which means it takes a total of 5 mana to finally get this equipped to your dude, and then you still have to actually get through with your dude and deal combat damage before you finally get to look at some cards on the top and play something for free. I feel like by the time you jump through all those hoops and you have all that mana to spend and you're actually able to get through for damage, like, if you're able to get through for damage at that point, you're probably able to just close out the game, right? You're probably winning. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get through for damage. So, I don't know. There's a part of me that thinks this card's a little too late, and that how much it costs is going to make it, you know, come online on a turn that at best is going to be difficult to actually take advantage of the card. So, I don't know. There is a lot of potential value here, being able to free cast anything, you know, the best card from the top, however many cards of your deck every turn. But if you're just hitting in for damage every turn, you're probably just winning the game anyway, right? So I don't know how to feel about it. It might be super powerful, and maybe I'm just crazy, but to me, it just seems like it's a little too slow. Next up, we've got Magda the Horde Master. 1 red and 1 for a 2/2 legendary dwarf berserker. Whenever you commit a crime, you create a tapped treasure token. It only triggers once a turn, but again, it can trigger once on their turn as well. And then you can sacrifice 3 treasures to create a 4/4 Scorpion Dragon creature token with flying and haste. And you can only activate that ability as a sorcery. So what's important to note here is you can potentially make up to 2 treasure tokens every turn cycle, 1 on your turn, 1 on their turn, just by doing things that you want to do anyway, like using removal on their creatures. And even though those treasure tokens come into play tapped, it doesn't matter if they're tapped if you're using them for the ability to make the 4/4 dragon, right? You can sacrifice tapped treasures, 3 of them, to make the 4/4 red dragon. So that kind of makes it a lot better. You can just you know, get your last treasure onto the field, and it doesn't matter that it's tapped because you're making your dragon, you're immediately swinging it in the air with it. If you play this onto a board that already has a bunch of treasures, you can immediately just make a couple dragons, which could be pretty cool. They could alpha strike and maybe just win the game. There's a lot of cool ways to use this. I don't know how good it is. It does require you to jump through some hoops. The amount of treasures it can make are kind of limited. But I feel like there's a lot of potential here. And let's be honest, a scorpion dragon is just awesome and I want it. It's so rad. Next up, we have Vaultborn Tyrant, 2 green and 5 for a 6/6 dinosaur with trample. When it or another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 3 life and draw a card. When it dies, if it's not a token, you create a token that's a copy of it, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So this is kind of a lot to unpack. 7 mana is a lot, but as soon as it enters the battlefield, you're going to gain 3 life and draw a card. And if they use removal on it right away, it dying is actually going to make you gain 3 life and draw a card again, because it's going to create a token copy of itself that then enters the battlefield and triggers this ETB ability again. So that's a lot of value even if they just remove it. But if they don't remove it, every creature you play with power 4 or more after that is going to gain you 3 life and draw a card. And no matter what, even when they do kill this thing, you've got another 6/6 trampler that it replaces itself with. So it just seems like a ton of value. Again, 7 mana is a lot, but it's also a dinosaur, and there's a ton of ways to make dinosaurs ramp onto the field earlier, and to just, in general, make dinosaurs better because of Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So this might be more usable than it looks on the surface, even being at 7 mana. I'm excited to see if anybody manages to brew something crazy with this card. Next up, we have Old-Tech Matter Weaver, 1 white and 2 for a 2/4 human artificer. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you choose one. Create a 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature token, or create a token that's a copy of target artifact token you control. What I love about this card is it's 2/4, it doesn't die to cut down, which is nice. That's not what I love, but that's nice. It triggers off every creature. It's not like a once a turn thing. You don't have to pay any mana. It's just every single time you cast a creature, at the very least you get a 1/1. Every single time. And then sometimes you can get even more than that, right? Make a token that's a copy of target artifact token you control. And I know your first thought is probably, oh, blood token, treasure token, map token, clue token. Like, those are great and all, but that's not like crazy. But I think the best way to use this, honestly, is with Thousand Moon Smithy. You play this on 3 and then play Thousand Moon Smithy on turn 4, and it makes a huge artifact token, and you could just copy the artifact token and get another one, and then they make each other even bigger. And then every creature you play after that, you can make another token of that giant Thousand Moon Smithy artifact creature token. I just think that's kind of wild. So I don't know. If this sees play, it's definitely going to be with that card for sure. Next up, we've got Toror Orb. Say that 3 times fast. I'm not even going to try. 2 mana for an artifact. Creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. I think this is going to be a very important sideboard card for best of 3 and standard moving forward. The fact that this can go in any color deck because it's a colorless artifact is super important. Being able to shut down ETB abilities shuts down the most important decks in the format, right? You have Boros Convoke, where you're shutting down their dude that gives haste and +1/+0. Some of the other cards in the deck, you're shutting down War Leader's Call, so it's no longer going to get the pings, right? But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have something like Domain Ramp, where you're able to shut down the triggers of like Atraxa or any of those other really big crazy spells. So it just seems like it is a really good sideboard card to shut down the best decks, and it can just go in any color, which is super important because we already have Doorkeeper Thrall, but that specifically can only go in white. This can just go in anything, and I think that's really, really important to not lose sight of. Next up, we have Rakdos the Muscle, 5 mana in the colors of Rakdos for a 6/5 flying trample legendary demon mercenary. So he does count as outlaw tribal. Whenever you sack a creature, another creature, doesn't work if you sack him. Exile cards equal to its mana value from the top of target player's library, and until your next end step, you may play those cards, and mana of any type can be spent to cast those spells. So not only can you just grab the top X of your deck by sacking something with high power, but you can also just choose to grab the top X of their deck too if you need to. Maybe you need to make sure you get a piece of removal and you're up against control and you know you don't have nearly as much removal in your deck as they do. You can choose to exile the stuff off their deck instead, you know? Or maybe you just need a really big creature like an Atali that you need to snag from them, and the rest of your deck's a bunch of little dudes that just aren't going to do it for you in the moment. Target their deck, right? There's so many circumstances where you might want to target your deck or their deck, and having that versatility is super cool. But then you also have this other ability where you can sacrifice another creature at instant speed to give Rakdos indestructible until end of turn. Now you can only activate this ability once a turn, and when you do, it does tap Rakdos, but you don't have to tap Rakdos in order to do the ability. You do the ability and then the ability taps Rakdos, which is really important to note, which means even if Rakdos is already tapped, if you haven't used this ability yet, you can still use it to save him and give him indestructible, which is really, really important. So having these sack outlets stapled onto this really, really relevant body, I think we might see a resurgence of some sort of Rakdos or 3-color that includes Rakdos Aristocrats style deck. Maybe that's the same deck as the Outlaws Sacrifice deck. I'm not sure yet, but either way, there's something here for sure. And it looks super rad. Like, we've seen some creatures with this ability to give indestructible by sacking things in the past, and they've always impacted Standard in some way. Some have lasted longer than others, but they've always at least made their mark a little bit, so it'll be interesting to see if this one does as well. Next up, we've got Annie Flash the Veteran, a whopping 6 mana in the colors of Naya for a 4/4 legendary human rogue with Flash. When Annie Flash the Veteran enters the battlefield, if you cast it, return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Whenever Annie Flash becomes tapped, you exile the top 2 cards of your library, and you may play those cards this turn. Okay, so 6 mana looks like it's way too much, right? Like, sure, you've got a cool creature that does stuff, but it's 6 mana, right? But if you think about the way that you're going to use her, it actually might be worth it. Like, you're probably flashing it in on your opponent's combat step after they already attacked you, and you can come down at Flash at instant speed, block a 4/4, and eat it, just kill it, and they didn't see it coming, right? That's already an insane amount of value. There's also a good chance that they're already tapped out at that point, and then they can't kill him. They have to wait until their next turn to have the mana to kill kill her. I think it's her. Annie. Annie's usually a girl name. Yeah. We're gonna say her. I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments. But usually, if their mana's tapped out, they're going to have to wait until their next turn to kill her, which means you guarantee you get to untap with her on the field. And then because you untap with her, you get to swing in at least once for sure, exile the top 2 cards, and then play them. So not only do you kill their 4/4 potentially, have a big creature on the field that they need to deal with, exile 2 cards that you get to play for free, and get something back from the graveyard that costs 3 or less onto the battlefield tapped. Like, that's just a lot. That is a lot of card advantage on one card. And at that point, even if they kill Annie, like, you still got all of that. The only catch is, I don't know what deck wants her. Now, in the right deck, she will absolutely be worth the 6 mana. But it has to be the right deck. It has to be a deck that's looking to do all of these things, and that isn't trying to win the game so fast that it's over before you get to the 6 mana to do this. So, if you figure out what that deck is, let me know in the comments, because whatever it ends up being, she's going to love it, and she's going to slot in for sure. Next up, we've got Final Showdown, and I think this is the White Wrath variant for this set. It's 1 white mana for an instant, and it has Spree, which means you have to choose at least one or any number of these these extra costs in order to get anything out of the card. So for +1 mana, all creatures lose all abilities until end of turn. This is nice to stop like death triggers and stuff like that. Another +1 is choose a creature you control and it gains indestructible until end of turn. So you can save your best dude. And then an extra 2 white and 3 is the Wrath part of the card, right? Destroy all creatures. Now, if you look at this as just the Wrath with some extra gravy, 6 mana to destroy all creatures at instant speed is a lot. Even at instant speed. But it is instant speed, so it could be really good. I think the fact that this can be used to save a creature for just 2 mana is really where this card kind of shines, because if you think about this being a 2 mana instant spell that just gives a creature indestructible until end of turn, and you can use it to, like, you know, stop your creature from dying to their removal or whatever, but then you also have this other mode where if it's later in the game and you top deck it and you have the mana, it can be a sweeper instead or in addition. If you start thinking about it like that, it starts to make a little bit more sense. So you got to kind of like not be tunnel visioned on the fact that it's a sweeper, because if that's all it is kind of overcosted. Although the instant speed does, honestly, there's something about it being instant speed that does really kind of excite me. Being able to, you know, wait until they play out all their creatures and then cast it on their turn and destroy everything seems kind of awesome. So maybe it is worth the mana. But either way, getting to pay 8 total mana and get all of these abilities, make sure that when you wipe the board, none of their death triggers happen because of the first ability, and making sure your best creature survives because it gets indestructible. It's kind of awesome that all of these work in tandem if you have the extra mana to sink into it. But it's the versatility and the charm-like qualities of the card that are going to make or break it and decide whether it's, you know, worth a slot in a constructed deck. Obviously, you slam this in limited. Next up, we've got Vraska the Silencer. 3 mana in Golgari for a 3/3 legendary Gorgon Assassin with Death Touch. Whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, you get to pay 1 mana, and if you do, it returns to the battlefield tapped under your control, and it becomes a treasure artifact that can sacrifice to make any mana, any color of mana, and it loses all other card types. Important to note, it only loses all other card types, not the text, not the abilities. So even though it's not a creature anymore, it won't be able to attack or block for you. If it has any abilities, you still get them. So if you kill their Brutal Cathar and pay the 1 mana, now you get a token copy of Brutal Cathar that's a treasure, and when it enters the battlefield, it still has the ETB ability. It can exile one of their creatures, and as long as you never sacrifice that treasure, the thing will remain exiled. You can get all of the 8 ETB abilities, you can steal them all from your opponent in this way. And also any kind of static abilities that just sit on a creature will still be on that treasure token. As long as you never sack the treasure, you have those abilities. So getting the ability to kind of steal your opponent's creature's abilities, but also maybe, depending on the situation, just ramp, right? If you're killing creatures that aren't giving you good abilities, you still get them as treasures and you can use them to ramp into things. So the versatility of kind of like how you use those tokens after you get them is super cool. And all of that stacked on a 3/3 Death Toucher that even if it swings in and trades with a creature, this ability is going to trigger on death. And even though Vraska's dying, like, it's still going to trigger for whatever creature you killed, and you're going to get the option to pay the 1 and get the treasure token version of that creature on your side. So a lot of value here. I think it's way better than it even looks like on the surface, and the fact that it's an assassin and can slot into Assassin Tribal gets me all sorts of excited. In my underpants, of course. Satoru, the Infiltrator. 2 mana in Dimir for 2/3 Menace Legendary Human Ninja Rogue. Whenever Satoru, the Infiltrator, and/or 1 or more other non-token creatures enter the battlefield under your control, if none of them were cast or no mana was spent to cast them, draw a card. Now, this works with so much. Every time you discover something, you draw a card. Every time you, reanimate something from the graveyard with a reanimation spell, you're going to draw a card. Every time you plot something into exile with the new plot ability and then cast it from exile for 0 mana, you're going to draw a card. If you use the hideaway cards to play things for free, like fight rigging, you're going to draw a card. All of these are nuts, but the way that I'm most excited to use it, not counting, you know, ninjutsu, because ninjutsu will also trigger it because it puts one of your ninjas into play attacking for no mana, so that'll trigger it too. But other than that, the most excited I am about using this, the way that I'm really excited about using it, is in a flicker deck, because if you're flickering the creatures in your deck to get their ETB abilities, they're coming into play and not being cast. So they're going to trigger this and make you draw a card as well. So turning every single creature into a cantrip every time you flicker it in a flicker deck seems nuts. We're just going to blink the world, guys. We're brewing that deck for sure. Next up, we've got the 𝑉𝒂𝒄𝒆 Ravenous Ride. This is a 5 mana 6/5 trample haste legendary frog horror mount in the colors of Golgari. That's a lot. Now it saddles for 1, and if it deals combat damage to a player, you can sack the creature that saddled it to draw X cards and put X lands from your hand onto the battlefield tap, where X is the sacrifice creature's power. So this is a little bit of a risk reward, right? You could sacrifice some token creatures to just draw a card or two and get a little bit of value. You can sacrifice something really big and you lose your big awesome threat, but you draw a bunch of cards and ramp out a bunch of lands. I think the best way to use this is with Urabrask's Forge. You want to find ways to get a big creature that you don't mind losing, and what better way than Urabrask Forge? It's going to make a token every single turn that's going to die anyway, and you can just sacrifice it to the 𝑉𝒂𝒄𝒆 to draw and put lands into play. Not only that, but it gets bigger and bigger every turn, so you get a token every single turn to sack to this guy, so you're never losing any of your other board presence. You're swinging with the token first, so you're not losing any of the value off of Urabrask's Forge, and the amount of cards that you're drawing and ramping is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger every turn. So Jund with Urabrask's Forge might be the best way to use this, but honestly, just in a token deck, just sacrificing little dudes to draw a couple cards here or there could probably be good enough. Or maybe just a Reanimator. Can we just sacrifice Yargle and Multani to this and like draw the entire world? That might be a thing. Insatiable Avarice. 1 black mana for a sorcery with Spree. You can pay an extra 2 colorless to search your library for a card, shuffle, and put that card on top, which isn't that great. It's a little overcosted, right? We have much, much better tutors. But the second ability, you could pay an extra 2 black mana, target player draws 3 cards and loses 3 life. That means for effectively 3 black mana, you can draw 3 and lose 3. That's a super good rate for a draw spell in black, probably the best we've seen in quite a while. And I think that's the primary way you're going to use this. But it's really cool that if you happen to get this a little bit later in the game and you have a little extra mana, you can pay the total of 5 here, search for a card, put it on top, and then draw 3. So you're effectively tutoring for any card and putting it into your hand instead of on top, and then drawing another 2 cards for your total of 5 mana, which is a ton of value. So a thing that can draw 3 for 3 on curve, but that can also get you that extra value later in the game when you have the mana, like, that's a lot. That's super good. And then you also have sort of the charm versatility of this in that in the right circumstances, if you just really, really need to tutor for something on turn 3, even if it's worth it to wait to cast it on turn 4, you can. So like, if you're staring down the barrel of Boros and you just really need to sweep the board, you can play this on turn 3 just to tutor up a Wrath and put it on top. And then turn 4, you draw it, you play your 4th land, you sweep the board. So having that versatility of that silver lining, like if you really need to, you've got that kind of panic button built in on top of your, you know, card advantage of a pay 3 to draw 3, and then, you know, the versatility and the value of being able to do both in the late game. It just seems like a lot. So I think this card is just super good. Next up, we've got Gisa the Hellraiser. Finally, Skeleton Tribal. Say it with me. I need a drink. 4/4 legendary human warlock for 2 black and 3 has ward 2 and 2 life. Skeletons and zombies you control get +1/+1 and have menace, and whenever you commit a crime, you create 2 tapped 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature tokens, but this ability triggers only once each turn. but only once on your turn and their turn, which means you can kill something of theirs on your turn and get 2/2/2s, and then kill something of theirs on their turn and get 2 more 2/2s. And this can just snowball really quickly, even though it's limited to once a turn, right? And you can just use your normal removal spells that you're going to use anyway, which is what's so great about this commit a crime mechanic, is that you don't really have to jump through that many hoops to turn it on, which is nice. But honestly, just Skeleton Tribal being a real thing finally, with this and Tiny Bones coming into the format, in addition with, you know, Case of the Stashed Skeleton, and the 3 mana enchantment that makes a skeleton token that I can never remember the name of, but I'm super excited to brew with. That deck's coming soon, by the way. Yeah, I think this Skeleton Tribal deck is going to be a real thing now, and I'm really excited to see how good it ends up being. But it's really hard to get rid of Ghisa here with the Ward 2 and 2 life, and she just gives you a ton of value. So, I kind of love her. Next up, we've got Fortune Loyal Steed. Now, I was earlier in the video talking about the guy that could search for a mount or a plains in the top 5, right? And how that guy paired really well with another card we look at later. Well, this is that other card, Fortune Loyal Steed. It is a 2/4 for 1 white and 2. Can't be cut down. Can't be lightning striked or lightning helixed, right? Really important. It's a legendary beast mount. And when it enters the battlefield, you get to scry 2, which is some nice extra value, especially when you consider its saddle ability. It saddles for just 1, and whenever it attacks while saddled at end of combat, you exile it and up to 1 creature that saddled it, and then return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. So, this is a way to repeatedly blink. It's a blink engine. It can blink something every single turn. But not only does it blink something that saddled it, it's also blinking itself, which means you're getting the ETB ability off of whatever creature saddled it when it comes back into play. Then you're also getting this Scry 2 ability again because Fortune's coming back into play. And then it's also effectively almost like having Vigilance, because it's going to come back into play untapped and be a 2/4 blocker. So all of that on one card seems nuts. And when you think about, you know, Mount Tribal, like we were talking about earlier with that other card, you can see how this deck sort of starts to build itself in a way, and I'm really excited to see what other Flicker support we're going to get. Is it going to be Esper Flicker with some of the other cards that we saw earlier? I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of Blink support. I'm just really excited. Obviously, this guy's a slam dunk in Limited, but I'm super excited to brew with this in Standard for sure. Then we've got Tiny Bones the Pickpocket. 1 black mana for a 1/1 legendary Skeleton Rogue with Death Touch. Skeleton Tribal, let's go. Outlaws Tribal, let's go. Tribal, let's go. Nectar Tribal, let's go. Man, I'm not gonna have a voice after this. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you may cast target non-land permanent card from that player's graveyard, and mana of any type can be spent to cast this spell. I've seen a lot of people downplaying how good this card is lately. It's just a 1/1 for 1. It's just gonna die to removal. It's just gonna get cut down. Like, sure. But that happens to every creature. You know, if you force them to use their removal on your 1-drop, that's probably a good thing. That means some creature down the line that's bigger and better is gonna survive when they finally run out of removal, because they had to use one of those removal spells on this guy. So I don't really buy that as an excuse. This comes down as a 1/1 Death Touch. If you make them waste their removal for your 1-drop, that's a good thing. If they don't, now they have to choose whether they're going to block it or not. And if they block it, you're almost always trading up because it's your 1-drop. So you kill a better thing than what you lose. And that's a good thing. You're happy to see that. If they don't block it, you're even happier because every time it gets through and doesn't block, you get to play whatever you want from their graveyard for free. Like, I'm not seeing a downside here. It just seems busted. That's all that needs to be said. That needs to be say. You can tell I'm tired. Do you agree with me? Do you think this is overrated, or do you think it's gnarly? Let me know in the comments. I'll be here drinking coffee. Alright, got that out of your system. Let's move on. Great Train Heist. Now we're getting to some of the best cards of the day. This one's kind of wild. This is another spree card, instant speed, 1 red mana. Choose 1 or more of these additional costs. For 1 red and 2, you untap all creatures you control, and if it's your combat phase, there is an additional combat phase after this phase. That's crazy. Total of 4 mana, you get an extra combat phase and untap your creatures. It's important to note, it only does that if it's your combat phase. So you do have to play this at instant speed during combat as a combat trick in order to line up that second combat phase. Keep that in mind. Also, for an extra 2 colorless mana, you can give creatures you control +1/+0 and first strike until end of turn. So you can either get an additional combat phase for 4, or just buff your team and give them first strike for 3, or for 6, you could do both. That seems really good. The versatility of being able to play it in the mid game combined with the advantage of being able to play it in the late game is nuts. But we're not going to stop there. It has a third ability, 1 red mana, choose an opponent. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to that player this turn, create a tapped treasure token. So, if you pick the first ability and the third ability, it's costing you a total of 5 mana to get 2 combat phases, and every single creature that hits them during the first and the second combat phase gives you a tapped treasure token for each of them, which means you're coming out of this with a ton of treasure tokens, double what you would have normally gotten just because of the second combat phase. If you're somehow able to pay a whopping 7 mana, you get all of this at once, which is just bananas. So that's not going to happen very often, but the fact that the potential is there. If the game happens to go long enough, you happen to get to 7 mana, you do have the option as an extra thing, is nuts. I think Boros Convoke wants this card so bad. I'm scared of it. It does some of the stuff that the deck's already doing while opening up doors to even more crazy ridiculousness. So I don't know, man. Like, this card just seems bananas in that deck. Let me know in the comments if you agree or not. I just think, again, you got to keep in mind the fact that these cards with these different options, like charms, part of their strength lies in the versatility. Like, charms are known for costing a little bit more than they should for each of their abilities, but the reason they're so good is because you get to choose the ability that's best for the given situation. So that versatility makes up for the fact that each of the options is a little overcosted. And I think these spree cards are gonna work in a similar fashion, except not only do you get the versatility, you also get the sheer card advantage of being able to dump as much mana as you have into them and getting multiple of these options to trigger at the same time. So I think the versatility of Charm combined with the mana sink and just maximum value of being able to choose everything, both of those on the same card, I think they're just way better than people think they're going to be. This one in particular just looks nuts to me. Next up, we have Colossal Rattleworm. What is happening to Magic? The power creep is so real. 2 green and 2 for a 6/5 trample. That's all you need to know. It's 2 green and 2 for a 6/5 trample. What? What about Juzamjin? What's happening? What is happening to Magic? There's more, because when it's in your graveyard, you can pay 2 mana and exile it from your graveyard to search your library for a desert and put it onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle, because why not? A 6/5 trample for 4 isn't good enough, right? Let's give you some automatic definitive value if your opponent ever kills the thing. Sure, but it doesn't stop there. If you happen to have a desert on the field, the Colossal Rattleworm just gets flashed, because why not? Like, then you could just, even if you're only playing a couple deserts in your deck, just so that if the first one dies, you can search out a desert. If you happen to draw into a second one, well, now you got a desert, so like, now you just have flash, you completely blow out your opponent. This just seems bananas. I think mono green is back. Honestly, it's probably not even going to go, well, it'll probably go in mono green because a 6/5 trample for 4 on its own is awesome. But I think this sees the most play in probably a 2-color deck, maybe Gruul, because all of the deserts tap for a mana of 1 of 2 colors, right? They're all dual lands. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what aggro deck this goes in, but there's gonna be a 2-color aggro deck that uses deserts, and this is gonna go in it, and it's gonna be scary, and I'm gonna cry. That's all. Next off, we have Slick Shot Show Off. Say that 3 times fast. 1 red and 1 for a 1/2 bird wizard with flying and haste. So it's already pretty decent in aggro. Not only that, it has kind of super prowess. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So it never increases its toughness, right? It can always get shocked and just die. But it's just a 2-drop. So like, even if they do, you didn't lose a lot of tempo advantage, right? But getting +2 attack for every non-creature you play, without it being limited to just triggering once a turn, like we see a lot of these crazy abilities limited to, seems kinda gnarly. But it gets even better because it has plot for 1 red and 1. And that doesn't seem like it's relevant for a card like this that is aggressive, that you want to just slam as soon as possible and go for the head, right? But it's actually super relevant because if you're playing this in a prowess style deck, you don't have to play it on 2. You can plot it off to the side, and then you can start to plot some instants and some sorceries off to the side, and then all of a sudden, on 1 turn, this comes down for free, and it's got haste. So it's swinging in. All of your sorceries or instants that you plotted are all getting cast for free, and then whatever mana you have is also playing even more stuff from your hand. You just completely go off with an Alpha Strike. So being able to tuck this guy away with plot, make it so they can't make you discard it, it's safe from removal, and you just wait until the key turn where you're just going to slam it, go with haste, and just play everything for free and just Alpha Strike for the win, seems nuts to me. And the fact that you can do that or just use it the old-fashioned way, and either way it's going to be good, I think just makes this card bananas. This card is crazy. I think this is one of the better cards we've seen today. Let me know if you agree, because if you don't, I just think you're wrong. Next up, we have Kellen the Kid. As if the cards weren't getting disgusting enough already. This is 3 mana in the colors of Bant for a 3/3 flying lifelink. It's a legendary human fairy rogue. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere that isn't your hand, you may cast a permanent from your hand that has equal or lesser mana value for 0 without paying any cost. And if you don't choose to cast a permanent from your hand that way, you can instead put a land from your hand onto the battlefield, untapped. This is crazy. Every time you cast an adventure from exile, you get a free thing onto the battlefield or ramp with mana that you can use that turn. Every time you, exile cards to play off the top. Every time you plot something and then play it for free. Like, every time you discover, you just get to trigger this off of discovering. Like, it just seems absolutely crazy. And the fact that you get that ability on a body that's actually really good even by itself, a 3/3 flying lifelink for 3, like, I just think this is bananas. There's gonna be a deck, right? There's gonna be a deck. There has to be a deck. I don't know what that deck looks like yet. There's so many options, but there's gonna be a deck. Which of the options that I listed, or maybe one I didn't think of, do you think is gonna be the most powerful way to use them? Let me know in a comment, because there's just like, this could go so many different ways, and I don't even know, but I know we need to pick one of them and just go super deep, because it just seems insane. That's it. That's all I got to say about that. Kellen is not a kid anymore. And then we have the last card of the day. That's right, Jace Reawakened. Is it Jace? Is it Ashiok? I have no idea. And that's kind of exciting to me. This is a 3 loyalty planeswalker. Has a static ability that you can't cast it during your first, second, or third turns of the game. And that's because it costs only 2 mana. This is bananas. We have not seen a 2 mana planeswalker in standard, I think, ever. I think literally ever. The fact that you can't cast it until turn 4 is fine. We don't care about that. +1, draw a card, discard a card, which it isn't great, but it's a nice little bit of extra value. The -6 is until end of turn. Whenever you cast a spell, copy it, you may choose new targets for the copy. This is nuts. Can sometimes close out the game by itself, but it's not an emblem, so it's not going to happen every turn. It's a one and done thing. After you've done it, if you didn't manage to kill your opponent, the game goes back to being a normal game, right? So it's not like completely busted. It could be, depending on what you combo it with, but we'll have to wait and see. The part of the card that's really disgusting though is +1, you may exile a non-land card with mana value 3 or less from your hand. If you do, it becomes plotted. So let me get this straight. This comes down on turn 4 for 2 mana, leaving up 2 mana so that you can hold up a counterspell to protect it. And then it immediately goes to 4 loyalty and exiles your best 3-drop from your hand. Which means even if they kill this, they either had to swing everything at it and you basically fogged them for a turn, or they had to use one of their removal spells to get rid of it, and you made them use up one of their cards. And either way, you still have the thing plotted in exile that you get to cast for free next turn, so you're up on value, right? But if you manage to keep this guy alive until your next turn, not only are you getting that 3-drop into play for free, but now every single turn, this guy is upticking loyalty to basically play 3-drops for free. You can just get a 3-drop for free every single turn for the rest of the game, while growing your loyalty on a planeswalker that is going to divert attention away from your health, because your opponent's going to want to try to attack and take it out most likely, while you're holding up all of your mana for counterspells. And I think that's what makes this card so powerful, is the fact that once it's on the field, you can just hold up counterspells and instant speed removal and never play anything again other than interaction, right? And just use the uptick ability to play all of your board presence. Maybe you're playing Urabrask's Forge as your win condition. Maybe you're playing Cryptic Coat. Like, maybe you need to sweep the board and you play Brotherhood's End for free by exiling it and plotting it and then playing it for free next turn. Like, every turn, you're taking whatever 3-drop you need to cast on your turn, exiling it, and then playing it for free the next turn, all the while holding up literally all of your mana to do whatever you need to do at instant speed, hold up all of your counter spells, all of your interaction. It just seems crazy. All of that combined with a planeswalker that essentially is starting with 4 loyalty that they have to deal with. So it's even more board presence. Like, I don't know. Like, I see a lot of people talking down on this, saying it's not that good. Like, what deck does it really belong in? The draw a card, discard a card is super meh. Like, none of that matters. Like, this just lets you play 3-drops every turn for free for the rest of the game while holding up all of your mana. And that's bananas in Control. So, I think this card is going to be busted. If you've got ideas about the deck that should be brewed around this, definitely let me know in the comments. I haven't even really thought that deep about it yet because there's so many new cards. There's a lot to take in. But I definitely know how it's going to be used. And that's how it's going to be used. And it's going to be gross. So those are all the spoilers today. It was a lot. I understand. We drank coffee. It was glorious. We've got more spoilers coming tomorrow. I'm going to try to keep up every single day with a full-length video like this so that you guys are up to date on all the spoilers. But if you don't want to wait for those, I'll be doing a ton of spoiler shorts as well, and I'll be keeping even more up to date with the spoiler shorts. So I'm going to link up above and down below my link to the spoiler shorts playlist, because I hit the ground running every morning, just making a ton of shorts to make sure that those cards get out to you guys as soon as possible, as soon as they get spoiled. But then we're gonna, you know, come back and we're gonna do these long form videos, and we're gonna go more in depth with the cards, which I think will be really fun. So I hope you stick around for the ride. Like the video, subscribe, do all the things. I love you guys to pieces. We're on our way to 6,000 subscribers, and I'm super stoked about it. It's gonna be one hell of a week. So sit tight, buckle up, strap in, because you're in for a ride. Till next time, always make them scoop. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.